From Field and Stream, Monday, August 11th, 1947. Most exciting lake trout fishing story ever written. Editor's note. Battling with a 40-pound lake trout, the most exciting story about lake trout fishing ever written, appeared in the Daily Press in 1940. Now, at the height of the lake trout fishing season, it is reprinted. Its author, who prepared the article for Field and Stream magazine, is still as ardent a lake trout fisherman as ever, and is constantly at the lake trout fishing grounds in his boat and outboard motor. Magnus Norgren. The author is an employee of the DuPont Company at Barksdale, Wisconsin. He is a familiar figure at Brownstone Island and everywhere where lake trout are caught. Here is the story in full, just as it appeared in 1940. By Magnus Norgren, Barksdale, Wisconsin. Written for Field and Stream. Lake trout fishing has just developed here the last couple of years. It took hold when it was discovered that giant lake trout were inhabiting the waters among the group of islands referred to on the map as the Apostle Islands near Bayfield, Wisconsin. There are a large number of these islands. Some offer exceptional scenic beauty. It may be well to mention that we have fished lake trout in this region for quite a number of years. But what I really wanted to bring out is that we had not located the areas which the real big fellows were inhabiting until the last 2 or 3 years. This was a very important event in lake trout fishing, which almost overnight developed into an extremely popular sport. Hard to read. My wife, my 8th son, Billy, which is my father, and myself decided to spend my vacation on one of these islands. The climate was ideal, though it was the first part of August. It was never too warm. At night, it was necessary to sleep under blankets. For fishing, we used an open boat powered by an outboard motor. We could start fishing within 5 minutes after leaving the dock. Incidentally, we never did leave the dock on our fishing tour without catching trout, of which 25 to 30% would go over 10 pounds. The water that these fish inhabit is very clear, pure, and cold. It is a long-to-be-remembered thrill to land the first big trout. Due to the exceptional clearness of this water, the fish can be seen quite deep down, usually straight down, as the large ones rarely come to the surface to fight. Sometimes the flash of the whole broadside of the fish can be seen, and this shows for a considerable depth through this clear water. This sort of thing really does add to the frequency of the heartbeat. We will attempt from these flashes to estimate the size, which invariably is underestimated because the fish usually does appear smaller way down. Then start to worry about the tackle, how well the fish is hooked, and if we are going to be able to keep our line taut enough so that there will be no slack, and not too taut so that it will tear loose. Usually the fish are hooked rather lightly. Undoubtedly, this is due to the fact that the fish striking an artificial bait makes no attempt to swallow it. A number are snagged on the outside of the mouth. This undoubtedly accounts for the fact that a large number of these fish, especially the larger ones, are lost in landing, and the writer has had several such experiences. In fact, there are a number of us who will swear we have had fish on over which we had little control. The chief reason for that was that we did not carry enough line on the reel, and we were therefore compelled to bowl the laker too much until the flesh tore sufficiently to permit escape. There is no doubt that we have a great deal to learn about this type of fishing. It is quite new to us and was mentioned earlier. These fish are generally caught quite deep, and in order to get the baits down, metal lines are universally employed. Copper, stainless steel, MONEL, etc. Therefore, not a great deal of extra line is carried on the reel. About 90% of this trolling is done from boats built commercially used for it. These boats can be released for parties or individuals, and from 4 to 6 lines are usually trolled from each at the same time. They can be hired by the hour or day. To charter one of those boats for a full day's trolling would cost anywhere from $20 to $30, depending on the size, and other facilities pertaining mostly to comfort. This, of course, includes the skipper. For those who do not possess suitable tackle, complete equipment can be rented at $1 per day. Many of these trips are planned beforehand by groups of sportsmen, family, circles, etc., so that they are enough in the parties to charter the boat themselves. However, there are always openings for individuals, smaller groups, or husbands and wives. boys and girlfriends, etc., to fill in on parties which are in the making at the docks. Quite often, as high as 10 or 12 will go in on one party. In a case like this, the trolling time per line is usually divided so that each person will get an equal amount of fishing. The expense of chartering the boat is usually prorated for anyone who is not equating with this type of fishing and who does not have knowledge of the fishing grounds. My advice is to get in one of these boats. You will catch more fish and larger fish. Here is the reason for it. These lake trout change location for the season, sometimes even from day to day. And the skippers who are out practically every day have developed a knack of finding the fish. From the experiences I have, I will attempt to describe the places where we usually find them. Early in the summer, they are found in rather shallow water, usually from 20 to 50 or 60 feet deep on a gravel bottom. Towards the height of the summer, they will be found in deeper water. I have occasionally had very good luck in water over 100 feet deep. The best bet of finding them will be at the edges of some reef where there are a number of large boulders in the bottom, and right at the edge where these reefs drop abruptly, for example, 20 or 30 feet in an extremely short distance. They cannot be found at these reefs all the times. As I mentioned earlier, they will change location. Therefore, the best results, a skipper is the best bet. He will pilot the boat from one place to the other without losing time roaming around. These skippers can almost unerringly hit spots which are only a few feet in area, and they will often remark, "Now get set for a strike," which puzzles the inexperienced troller when, as a matter of fact, a strike will invariably result. These sports are found by compass and running time, as well as simple triangulation using landmarks along islands. Another important item, these skippers know the depth of the water wherever they are trolling and always keep the inexperienced angler informed on when to let out or take in line and how much. There are times during the season when these fish must be taken near bottom or anywhere from 10 to 20 feet of bottom, and anyone not familiar with the depth is apt to troll either too shallow or else become fouled between boulders on the bottom, where there are times when they can be taken at any depth as a matter of fact, best near the surface. This is the time of the year when grasshoppers are the most plentiful. On the surface, the water among the islands during that period can be discovered hordes of shipwrecked grasshoppers. Why lake trout has come to the surface during this time, I am not prepared to say, as the year-round diet consists of small fish, chiefly in the herring family. However, my guess is that these smaller fish come to the surface to feed during this period, and that lake trout keep in pretty close touch with the schools of their own feed. Because they are thus attracted to the surface, they will occasionally start to pick up these bugs. Some lake trout that we catch during the season have their stomachs literally packed with hoppers, while others have none. This incidentally would open possibilities for a bit of exploring for the fly casting experts. The lake trout can occasionally be seen leaping, and I dare say that a Laker hook on such equipment could prove extremely interesting. Now that I have described this kind of fishing as I see it, I also attempt to give you a bit of detail in connection with this catching of this largest Laker caught here in this season. My wife, my son Billy, and myself left the dock in the morning, but after getting on the other side of the island, the place we were to fish, my wife found the lake too rough and preferred to return to the island and spend the forenoon visiting with Mrs. Jacobson. After that had been arranged, Billy and I pointed the boat away from the sheltered spot which the dock occupies and out around the island right into the northeaster, which by this time had started to pick up. At 10 a.m., after we had picked up a few smaller fish, the big fellow struck. I immediately realized that we had hooked into a good-sized one, therefore it would be well to get him off the boulders to prevent him from fouling the line. Billy was immediately put in charge as an engineer and pilot. We worked the fish off the boulders and onto deeper water with sand bottom, with the intention of using this area for the battle. On such a bottom, it would not be possible for him to foul the line, and therefore would not necessarily have to put an excessive strain to keep him off the bottom. The extra hard pull method may work out okay should the fish be well hooked, but as earlier mentioned, these lake trout, when striking artificial bait, are seldom hooked well enough to use the strong arm landing methods. Only the day previous I had lost a very large fish, to my belief a good deal larger than this largest one I caught. This loss I blamed on to rough handling. After I had played this fish, nearly for 1 hour, I decided to land him. However, he was not very tired and attempted a few rushes, which I snubbed rather abruptly in order to not lose much line. This is just what he needed for freedom. My belief is that the flesh tore sufficiently to prevent his escape. At the time, I decided that any large fish would be handled without utmost care to prevent repetition. Therefore, any rough stuff would be out in the future. Back to the story. After 1 hour of continually taking and giving mine, I decided that the fish should be tired enough to attempt a landing. During all this time, the northeaster was getting bigger and better. The sea had really started to boil. This made it impractical to attempt the landing on such a rough sea. There were one moment where we would be riding on the crest of a big roller, and the next moment we would be way down between the two of them. We decided to pull in on the lee side of North Twin Island, which was our nearest island at the time. This I decided we could chance, as the fish now appeared tired enough to permit keeping him off the bottom without undue strain whenever we crossed any reefs. This trip had to be slow and delicate, but Skipper Billy had everything under control. Without further difficulty except a great deal of line give and take, we eventually reached a spot fairly well sheltered. At least the waves were not very large because we were on the lee side. The wind, however, was blowing plenty hard. Here we had hoped to finish the battle, and I worked the fish near enough to so that I expected to see him any moment. However, each time when he decided he was close enough, the give and take game was continued. I now realized that I had another problem which I had not thought of earlier. How would I go about landing the fish with the help of only Billy, who was only 8 years old? I did not have a gun, but both a landing net and a gaff hook. The landing net would not be suitable for such a large fish. The gaff would be okay, but I would not risk having Billy attempt the gaffing. I could not risk working the fish near enough and have Billy take charge of the pole, as I did not know how well the fish was hooked, so that the chance of losing him on either a bit too hard pole or a slack line loomed up quite big. I temporarily gave up the plan to land the fish at this place and decided to maneuver the boat to the dock on South Twin Island, our headquarters. This would necessitate pouring more gas in the tank of the small motor which we used for trolling. This motor had been working all the time, which was mostly due to the fact that the boat would at times drift too fast with the hard wind whenever the fish would take a notion and go the other way. He, therefore, would, to a certain extent, govern our activities. Billy then attempted to pour the gas. This did not work out so well. The wind blew so hard that instead of the gas going into the funnel, it was scattered over the water. He attempted this a couple of times but had no luck. As mentioned earlier, I did not wish to let go of the pole for a second. Now the problem was, how long would the remaining gas in the motor hold out? I again decided to land the fish while Billy held the boat into the wind. I reasoned that I might be able to land him after working him up by holding the pole with one hand and using the other as for gaffing. I soon discovered that this fish was not played out by a long shot, not nearly as much as I had hoped. There was one thing left to do, and that was to work the boat in closer to the island where the wind would not be too strong to prevent gassing up. This, of course, was a bit risky because we would get to on rather shallow water and a bottom which contained boulders. However, the boulders at that place were not extremely large, so we decided to take a chance. All of this worked out as okay. Billy gassed up and started for Lennis Jacobson's dock, which is located on the lee side of South Twin Island. This was mostly a process of drifting, but at times we had to hold the wind whenever the fish became stubborn. You see, we do not, for reasons mentioned earlier, carry an excessive amount of line on the reel. Therefore, my skipper was plenty busy all of the time. It was no easy matter for him to either. As the storm was gradually increasing, my arms were becoming paralyzed, and how I wished I could have handed the pole to someone just for a few minutes to enable me to rub my arms and relieve the cramps. We were gradually approaching our destination, but I still had one more hazard, and that was the passage between South Twin and Rocky Island, where the water is rather shallow with some boulders. That meant that I would be compelled to keep a rather short line on the fish at all times while going through this passage in order to keep him off the bottom and possibly danger. This proved to be quite a job, as the mountainous waves were breaking very badly there, and on account of the shallow water, it was necessary to let out and take in line with each wave, let out when riding into the crest and take in when dropping into that again. At the same time, I used the spring in the rod to even the strain, For reasons already mentioned, the fish was kept on as a short line as I dared use, as he was practically straight down at the time. I believe he put up the hardest fight over these shallows. We managed to get through this reef without tearing loose or permitting slack enough for escape. By this time, we had been noticed from the dock, where all the rest of the trawling fleet, except for one boat besides mine, had pulled in for shelter. Incidentally, this other boat pulled in about 15 minutes after mine. According to the local fishermen, this was the worst northeaster of the season. They could see us now and then. We were on the crest of a wave and decided that we were disabled, as we apparently were not moving, except with the waves. So one of the boats pulled out to aid us. When this boat learned the cause, he returned to the dock and arranged to have Shorty, this is Lennis's Jacobson's hired man, to be on hand with a .22 caliber rifle. Then, when he came near the dock, he stepped into the small dory, where the water was calm here, and came to help me. The fish was now, for the first time, brought into view. One well-placed shot in the head put an end to one of the most exciting days I ever put in fishing. My arms were numb, and the termination of the fight brought a relief that I cannot describe. Shorty lifted the fish into the boat, and at the same instant the hook fell out. Lady Luck had certainly favored me. It was now 1:00 p.m., 3 hours after the fish was first hooked. The fish had been hooked behind the upper lip bone, which grows into the upper snout proper in front, but as it extends back along the cheek, it is loose from the head structure, except for a piece of thin skin or tissue between it and the head. This patch of skin had been ripped by the hook about 2.5 inches, holding only by the hook by about 1/2 inch piece of tissue. If that had been ripped out, it would have liberated the fish. It was also fortunate that he never obtained sufficient slack in the line to permit throwing the hook, as the line was about 2.5 inches as long. It was also fortunate that he never obtained sufficient slack line to permit throwing the hook, as the opening was about 2.5 inches long, as mentioned above. I guess everybody was on the dock by this time, where congratulations were offered and the pictures were taken. The fish was also weighed in at this time, and on available scales registered exactly 40 pounds. However, afterwards, when he was sent to the city of Bayfield for official weighing, he registered 36.5 pounds. The difference likely was due to the variation of scales as well as the shrinkage. We spent another 8 or 10 pleasant days of fishing and caught many fish over 20 pounds. The weather was pleasant in the balance of our stay. Some days the water was as smooth as a mirror. We have already made arrangements with the Jacobsons for a cottage next summer for our 2 weeks vacation. The Jacobsons are very pleasant, typical Nordic people, the kind that you cannot help but like. We really felt at home there during our entire stay, and looking forward to the time when we will be with them again. This lake trout was awarded the 4th place in the Field and Stream contest, as well as the National Sportsman Fishing Contest, which takes in the United States and Canada. And the United States has won 2nd place and 1st for the state of Wisconsin. The end. Announcement. The record catch of the trolling season was the 36.5-pound lake trout caught by Magnus Norgren, Barksdale, off Brownstone Island in the Apostle Islands. Mr. Norgren, fishing from an open 18-foot boat propelled by an outboard motor, had to ride one of the season's worst northeasters to get this prize. He was fishing with his son Billy when the fish struck. It took 3 hours to land the fish, pulling it away from Brownstone to Willie's Island. He finally had to shoot the fish to get it into the boat. On the same trip, he caught 4 other fish, weighing 19, 17, 14, and 11 pounds. Mr. Norgren's record catch was 7.5 pounds, less than the all-time record, a 44-pound catch held by Robert Feldmer, town of Russell, 1938.